Paxman.
Maybe you saw these headlines. Tonight, questions about some of the research which lay behind them. Tonight, literature calling for the beheading of lapsed Muslims and the oppression of women is being sold inside some of the leading mosques in Britain. The headlines were shocking, but were they all they seemed? Some receipts which claim to prove the origins of extremist literature seem to have been faked.
It has absolutely nothing to do with us. It's totally misleading and inaccurate information. In fact, we're considering legal action over it because this has the potential to damage the good name and reputation of our mosque.
The research director of the think tank that published the report is here. Also tonight, the Bank of England clubs together with 3 other big beasts to try to prevent a worldwide recession. Can it work?
What's staggering is the sheer scale of the money wasted here.
And Jerry Robertson is still trying to fix the National Health Service. We'll bring him face to face with the chief executive of the NHS. Good evening. You may have seen the report in the papers. It made the front pages. Britain's mosques are being subverted by extremist literature. It could hardly have been more damning or more sensitive. The reports were based upon what was billed by the think tank Policy Exchange as the most comprehensive academic survey of its kind. Newsnight very nearly joined the coverage. We were working on a detailed film based on the report. But when we were checking evidence underpinning the report, we began to worry. Richard Watson reveals doubts over the quality of some of the original research and investigates allegations that some of the supporting evidence may even have been fabricated. Allahu Akbar,
Allahu Akbar. Policy Exchange's report depicts a battle between fundamentalists and the reformists for the control of Britain's mosques. Extremist books preaching intolerance are clearly available in some Islamic centres visited for the report. But our research has found major inconsistencies and doubts over some evidence. This raises serious questions about the reliability of the work and research ethics amongst some of those who carried it out. The recent report from the Policy Exchange was billed as a landmark piece of work. 4 teams of 2 researchers went into 100 mosques and Islamic institutions across Britain with the aim of trying to get a feel for the kind of books on offer. Researchers gathered receipts to prove they'd acquired the books from mosques. Experts checked and rechecked translations of quotes. It was the most detailed study of its kind, and the report came to some pretty startling conclusions. In 25 out of the 100 locations, researchers reported finding extremist and separatist literature. Some of the extracts from the books were remarkable. It is mandatory to hate and dislike the unbelievers. The woman who complains against her husband every now and then is one of hell. The story made front-page news, and the Times reported that Conservative leader David Cameron was going to raise the report's conclusions with King Abdullah during his recent state visit. Newsnight too was going to run a story based on the report, and the Policy Exchange had given us a bundle of receipts the outside teams carrying out the research for them had provided to prove where they'd acquired the books. But we discovered suspicious mistakes in some of these documents and decided to hold off while we investigated further. This is the Muslim Cultural Heritage Centre in West London, where 3 key extremist books were said to have been acquired. An Arabic book called Loyalty and Enmity concerning relations between Muslims and non-Muslims states, "It is mandatory to hate and dislike the unbelievers. Actually, it is mandatory to stay away from them and to separate from them." Another book described the Jews as a people who were moulded with treachery and backstabbing. These were shocking findings because the centre has a reputation for supporting moderate Islam and interfaith work. But the mosque managers denied any knowledge of these books and are adamant that the receipt supplied by the researchers to prove their purchases was not issued by them.
Well, we don't use this kind of receipt, so definitely it doesn't belong to the centre. And I can see that the way they wrote actually the centre, the name of the centre is actually different from the way we write it. This is actually American spelling of centre.
They spell it C-E-N-T-E-R.
Actually we write it obviously the English spelling, which is C-E-N-T-R-E. This person, Sheikh Ilahi, is totally, mysterious to us, because he's not one of our imams here. He's not one of our employees or our volunteers or our, clients or our worshippers even, actually.
Policy Exchange told us the receipt had been acquired from someone who'd set up a stall selling books in the mosque complex. But this is hardly the same as the mosque officially approving the books, and there is no mention of any unofficial stall holder in the report, although it does say that in some cases books could have been made available without the knowledge of mosque elders. But beyond this, the director has other concerns about the receipt. Although he does occasionally allow book fairs at the centre, he says none was held on the date written on the document.
It was dated the 28th of September 2007, which is really very recent, and that was actually in the month of Ramadan, which is a Friday day. And definitely in the month of Ramadan we don't actually hold any book fairs here. For the sheer, we don't have the space for it anyway. So I would be again. I would like to know more about the circumstances surrounding this transaction and how it happened.
Faced with this mystery, we set out to check other receipts. Several books in the report were acquired from a bookshop inside the world-famous Regent's Park Mosque. We've just been into Regent's Park Mosque to see whether the receipts tally, and in this case we've bought a book called 4 Essays on the Obligation of Veiling, and this receipt does match the original provided by Policy Exchange. But as we checked others, we found some more conflicts about the evidence. The North London Central Mosque was said to have supplied a book by the political Islamist Maududi, which says jihad is now a dictated obligation. Although some in the mosque management sympathise with Maududi's writings, they categorically say they did not supply this book.
First of all, we have no bookshop at our mosque. Also, we never ever sold any books in our mosque.
That the researchers actually provided a receipt for the purchase of these books. Now, I'm going to show you the receipt.
I'm very surprised about it. Show me the receipt.
Here's the receipt. It clearly says your logo on the top,
yes,
with the address on the bottom.
This is our logo, this is our logo, this is our address.
And your phone number.
But yes, anyone can do this logo and can use this receipt. It is designed on the computer.
But it says NLCM at the top in green.
Yes, anyone can do this, can copy this.
You're saying
it is made on the computer.
You can see that round the edges of them.
We decided to show the receipt to Kate Barr, a registered forensic document examiner. An expert witness, she's examined thousands of documents in court cases, including some crucial to the international war crimes trials into allegations of genocide in the former Yugoslavia.
It looks to be green coloration, but when we look at it more closely under the microscope, you can see that it's not actually a true green, that it's actually been made up of blue and yellow dots combining to produce the green coloration. It's been produced on an inkjet printer. It wouldn't be the norm to produce something that you're going to produce a lot of on an inkjet, simply because it's much more expensive to do. But if it was something that you were producing in large quantities, it's much more likely that you would have them commercially produced rather than on like these, which are home printed.
Policy Exchange told us that the books were provided for free by representatives of the mosque on the basis that they were in keeping with their teachings. As is the customary nature of such transactions, payment for the books was made in the form of a donation to the mosque. Accordingly, it is unsurprising that the receipts provided were not official. But factual errors in other receipts are harder to explain. Researchers say they acquired extremist books from Euston Mosque and provided a receipt. The receipt gives the address as 202 North Gower Street, London, whereas in fact Euston Mosque is around the corner at 204A. We showed the receipt to the mosque committee. If you look at this receipt here, it says Euston Mosque at the top, and it has the address on the bottom, which is 202 North Gower Street.
Right.
Is this your receipt?
Certainly not. This is not our receipt.
Are you absolutely sure about that?
Yes, please.
We are very surprised. We are very surprised to see that somebody is using our name.
Does it surprise you it actually says Euston Mosque with the wrong address?
It does surprise me. It does surprise me because I've been involved with this mosque for the last 10 years and I haven't seen anything like this at all. And we can show you, we don't have our receipt books like this. And we don't sell anything. We only sell yearly calendar in this mosque, and we don't supply receipt for the calendars.
Book. It's this one here.
We compared an official receipt from the mosque to the one supplied by Policy Exchange researchers. Here's what the document examiner said about the official receipt.
Looked up closely, the one that you were given, it's a solid colour and the appearance of the printing is consistent with it having been commercially produced. It's a fairly poor quality paper and printing, but would be entirely consistent with a long print run from a genuine receipt.
And the other one?
By contrast, the Euston Mosque one doesn't have any colour on it at all, and again, if we look at it more closely, we can see
you can see the satellite dots, can't you?
Characteristic features of inkjet printing.
The address in Policy Exchange's report and on the receipt is 202 North Gower Street, London. I decided to pay a visit. It turns out that this address is the London headquarters of a separate Islamic group, the UK Islamic Mission.
What I want to ask you is whether you recognise this document. It's a receipt that says Euston Mosque, but it says your address, 202 North Gower Street, London NW1. Is that your document?
No, this is not my documents, and this is not our UK Islamic Mission documents, because we have special format on our receipts. So we don't have that type of documents.
You don't have this kind of receipt?
No, we haven't.
To explain the discrepancies, Policy Exchange argues that either the mosque and the UK Islamic Mission building are in fact affiliated, or that there is a prayer room in 202 North Gower Street, which users refer to as Euston Mosque. Both scenarios are denied by the people we've interviewed.
Once again, to get to the bottom of all this, we asked whether we could speak directly and independently to the researchers who carried out the work at Euston Mosque. But Policy Exchange said this would not be possible because the researchers are away on a religious retreat for 40 days in Mauritania.
This is the Tawhid Mosque in Leighton, East London. It's a Salafi mosque and as such might be expected to promote the teachings of Saudi clerics. One book the researchers say they bought here states, "There is absolutely no brotherhood between the believer and the disbeliever." But again, there are inconsistencies. The report wrongly gives the address of the mosque as 78 Leighton High Road, which is actually the address of this bookshop next door.
You just have to ask the bookshop or ask anybody at the mosque that it has absolutely nothing to do with us. It's totally misleading and inaccurate information. In fact, we're considering legal action over it because this has the potential to damage the good name and reputation of our mosque.
Researchers provided 2 receipts for the books. The first is from a standard numbered receipt book, and we've seen the carbon copy, so we know it's genuine. It's handwritten in the name of Tawhid Islamic Centre, and it gives the bookshop's address. But we're told that researchers were sent back to get a duplicate receipt on headed paper. This second receipt, which is printed on an inkjet printer, was in the name of Tawhid Mosque and Islamic Centre. The word mosque has been introduced. We also noticed that the handwriting on this receipt is very similar to the handwriting on another receipt, which researchers say they obtained from the Muslim Cultural Heritage Centre 10 miles away. Policy Exchange insisted that the 2 receipts were written by different people,
Very noticeably, the gap
so we showed the handwriting to Kate Barr, the forensic document examiner.
The significant similarities, one of the nice ones was the T. That's a good example. It's done with the vertical stroke first, coming up and doing the horizontal stroke second. Other nice features were the G, which has a very long downstroke, especially in the one in charge. Other features of significance, it's mainly block capital writing, but the I's have got dots on them. In my opinion, I think there's strong evidence that they were written by the same person, and I consider it unlikely that they were written by more than one person.
If 2 receipts from 2 different mosques were written by the same person, it's highly likely that some kind of deception or forgery has taken place. Policy Exchange categorically told us that they're satisfied the researchers did not fill in their own receipts and that they are genuine documents.
Again, we asked to speak directly to the researchers. We received this 9-page legal letter, and in relation to the Leighton Mosque, the letter states that the researcher was taken personally by a worshipper to the neighbouring bookshop and sold books on the basis that they were sanctioned by the mosque. The letter goes on to say that if we were to broadcast our film, we would be sued, and it states Policy Exchange would pursue such litigation relentlessly to trial or capitulation by the corporation.
We decided to run further forensic tests and uncovered a piece of extraordinary evidence from the receipts from 2 other mosques named and shamed in the Policy Exchange report. This evidence concerns the Al Muntada Mosque in West London and the Muslim Education Centre in High Wycombe. This is the ESDA test. If you write on a document, the impressions from the pen strokes can be revealed on pages below using this technique. An electrical charge is induced and the impressions caused by the writing on sheets above will appear as black lines.
So what I'm doing is overlaying the ESDA impression on the writing. We think it may have caused those impressions. So as I reveal the match between the writing and the
impressions. As you're pulling this
impressions,
sort of paper away, you can see the exact match.
you can see that, yes, that the writing and the impressions are an exact match,
So
one for the other.
How confident are you about that?
Every time you write in a slightly different manner. So the fact that you can match up exactly the writing with the impressions means that these impressions must have been caused by this writing.
You're 100%?
I am, yes.
And what does that actually mean in terms of these receipts? Because the other receipt is this one here from Muntada in Parsons Green.
What it means is that the Muslim Education Centre invoice was resting, probably at a slight angle, on top of the Al Muntada Mosque receipt when it was written.
So in other words, this receipt from the Muslim Education Centre in High Wycombe was written in the same location as this pink one?
Yes, it does. The two were resting one on top of the other when the one from High Wycombe was written.
We took the receipt to the Muslim Education Centre in High Wycombe. We did find one of the 7 titles listed on the receipt on the shelves, but the document provided by the researchers is completely different to the official receipt book, and the management say it's a fake.
Well, someone in their wisdom has even got the address wrong. We normally put the address different as well. It's for the parade, Totteridge Drive. When the story broke out, it was frontline news, it was front page news in the local paper, it hit the headlines. And the elderly gentlemen that pray here became very stressed. Everybody felt bunkered in. Oh my God, here we are under the spotlight. And to discover now that the people that are doing it are actually involved in forgery is quite despicable. Well, they forged a receipt, so I would now even question whether they even came here, because we would query that.
Well, books on the shelf.
But they could be bought anywhere, not necessarily here. These are open circulation books.
All these disputes have left some of those named and shamed in the report angry.
Somebody is trying to giving a bad name or bad name of the mosque. That's all it is. That's what I think, because this is certainly not any of our receipts or anything.
We have no problem with the thesis of the report, and that's, you know, books for promoting, undermining community cohesion should be exposed. There's no problem with that. But, you know, to go from that and try implicate, you know, community centres who are trying very hard and actually leading the way to, you know, to promote community cohesion that way, it's very demoralising.
We have never promoted these books at all. In fact, if you come to our circles or you listen to our sermons, we are very much involved in precisely interpreting the Quran and understanding it in a modern British context.
The Policy Exchange report states that extremist literature was found in 25 out of the 100 mosques researchers visited. Our research into 5 of these locations has revealed serious doubts about the way this work was carried out in the name of Policy Exchange, and 3 receipts even suggest evidence of forgery. Given the influential status of this think tank and its report, surely this must be cause for concern.
Well, Dean Godson, Research Director of the Policy Exchange, is with us now. Did you check that these receipts were genuine?
Of course. We checked into everything that we did. We're very confident in all of this. This remains the most important report that's ever been produced on Islamic literature in this country. We never based this report on the receipts. You don't find a mention of the receipts in the report. This was a belt and brace exercise. But there's a bigger thing here, Jeremy, because you've had 17 minutes with which to do this package. We're entitled to say something.
You're saying that this key piece of evidence which determined the authenticity of documents which formed the basis of a highly inflammatory report, that their authenticity doesn't matter?
No, I didn't say that. I said they never appear in our report. We did
You
not
claim
base.
you checked them. Did it not strike you as odd that 6 of them were produced on an inkjet printer?
Jeremy,
Did it strike you as odd that?
Let me say something to you. This report remains the best such thing. It was reported everywhere. It was reported
The fact
in
that it was
every
reported everywhere has
single-
nothing to do whether
yes,
it was
it does.
accurate or not, does it?
Your editor, Peter Barron, made a disastrous editorial misjudgment bottling out of publishing this report.
I'll tell
on
you
the
why
night.
he didn't publish it. He didn't
No,
publish it
no,
for
I'll
the
tell you,
very
let me
reasons
finish
just
it.
adduced, which is to say that there are serious doubts about the authenticity of the receipts upon which this evidence is supposedly based. That's why.
Let me tell you something. They are not, as you can see yourself, they are not denying for one moment this lift. Look at the Wickham Centre. Here is the book they have. Women Who Deserve to Go to Hell. They don't deny it. This is the important
they
issue.
do deny it.
Community.
Again, that is
no,
the
they're
great-
not. He
no.
said it's on the shelf.
No,
Jeremy,
sorry.
you're not in command of the facts.
One man said that it was indeed. That particular book, I believe, was on sale at his particular
right.
institution. The others deny it.
Well, let's go through it. Let's go through it case by case because we'll rebut it.
All right, let's go through it case by case. How is it that 2 receipts from institutions 10 miles apart are produced by someone with the same handwriting?
Well, your graphologist states in her report, which we have seen, that in fact there is no such certainty. The sample is way too small. They were produced by entirely different teams of researchers.
Can you explain to us how it is that a receipt from an institution in High Wycombe appears to have been produced at the same time and in the same place as a receipt from an institution in Parsons Green 40 miles away?
Neither of these institutions deny the literature concern, nor does the one in Parsons Green.
That's not my question. My question is about the authenticity of the receipt.
I'm coming on to that. You have had these receipts for weeks. We have asked for a chance to have a look at the receipts. You have not.
We
given
raised
them...
these concerns with you 6 weeks ago.
No, you did not. You did raise them only today in respect of the evidence.
6
we
weeks
only
ago
got
they
notice.
were raised with
no.
you.
Some of the concerns were raised then, but the concerns have been changing the whole time.
Oh, so some of them were. You've just said they weren't.
No, this concern
You just said the
was
concerns
never
weren't
raised. There
Now
was...
you say some of them were.
Some of them were, but not the ones that you've just raised. The question you have just asked, in respect of them being written in the same location, was only raised today. We have only had 1.5 hours to look at this.
You apparently had already checked these receipts.
Yes, we checked them, and we are highly satisfied with them.
And 2 of them, according to a woman who appears in court, has the full confidence of the British judicial system, is a registered forensic expert in this field, attests that they were written at the same place and the same time, and they're 40 miles apart.
How many? There are many reasons that could be.
Oh, really? Just tell me one of them.
Well, let me run through them for you. First of all, we have only had 1.5 hours in which to respond to this
nothing to
last
do with
bit.
it.
Well, it is a great deal to do with it because it has a great deal to do with the shoddy methodology, which has been characterised Newsnight's entire conduct.
There is
of this
nothing
affair.
shoddy about this. You've
Yes.
had there a woman recognised by the English legal system saying that they were written at the same time and same place.
And it is normal in these cases to double check the matter and to check more than one opinion. Why have you not checked it?
What is the
how
answer?
How many of these
I'm
other
sorry,
how many receipts have you had a chance
already
to look
checked
through?
it.
We have checked them, we are satisfied with them, but we do not base our report on the receipts. We base our report
So you
upon
also
witness
did your own
statements
forensic
of
analysis, did you?
No, we don't do forensic analysis. We can't be. You don't do forensic analysis very often for your reports either. We have a quite different approach. We have the witness evidence of these books being seen by our researchers, and the vast bulk of them
Being
not
seen
denied.
by, of course, is not the same. They are
They are
attesting that they
on
were
sale
bought.
on the websites.
They are attesting
They are on
that
sale
they
on the
bought-
websites of these mosques.
Websites are another matter. You are claiming that you had evidence that these books had been bought in these mosques.
Yes, and they're not
that
denied.
evidence is quite clearly, in expert opinion, fabricated.
No, we do not accept that for one moment. We need to have a proper analysis of our own. We look at all allegations seriously, but we do not regard that anything has been proven here.
It didn't strike you as the slightest bit odd that there would have been at least 5 of these receipts produced on inkjet printers rather than the sort of receipts you would expect to find?
Since when is there anything in Sharia law about receipts not being produced on inkjet printers by mosques, many of whose authorities, including, it might be added, Al-Manar, do not deny in their own testimony to you, Newsnight, in the aborted broadcast, which you did not produce. Al-Manar do not deny that they have a problem with rogue sellers. They specifically told it to your reporter, Richard Watson.
And that would be the explanation, would it, for the fact that these receipts have the wrong addresses on them, 4 of them?
You will have to ask those who supplied those within the mosques.
You apparently checked these receipts so you would know that they were the wrong addresses.
No, we didn't. They were supplied by people within the mosques. The mosques acknowledge, Al-Manar in particular, they have a problem with rogue sellers.
The mosques deny it.
They have it. We have it from Newsnight. We have it in your draft broadcast of the 29th of October by Richard Watson. You have the material on camera in your own archives.
Well, of course, the way to settle this would be obviously to talk to the researchers, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Will you facilitate that?
Well, they have been facilitated. They've spoken to Peter Barron. They've spoken.
No, they haven't.
Yes, they have. I was a witness to it, Jeremy. You've been misbriefed. I was a witness to it with a whole stack of other people. Peter Barron has spoken
how many researchers
to one.
Were there?
There were 8 researchers all told.
And they've all spoken to the editor of Newsnight,
No,
have they?
they were brought on. The one in question was brought on.
One researcher
Yes,
spoke.
that was the one he asked to speak to, and he was brought on. We then brought another one on. We have cross-examined them ourselves.
We've asked to speak to all the researchers.
Yes, but these people are under threat. You have yourself described how...
You just said they spoke to the editor of Newsnight.
Yes,
I've asked you now if we can speak to them, and you say, no, we can't.
Well, it's pretty understandable, isn't it? You've heard of somebody called Salman Rushdie, and they've seen how leaky Newsnight is.
They
saw how your report...
understandable, but it is not consistent with your claim that they've spoken to the editor of this programme.
Yes, I listened to one of them speak to the editor, and one of the other ones has spoken to Richard Watson. So, in fact, the idea that we've been sheltering these people from Newsnight is nonsense, but they are quite rightly reluctant to come and talk to your reporters when you have turned out, Newsnight has turned out to be such a massively leaky vessel. The exclusive report leaking to the Sunday Times beforehand, to the Asian online network, come on, this is a very leaky vessel. Nobody would want to take it.
Those are accusations you cannot prove and we would deny.
Sorry, I have it. I can prove it.
Hang on,
because I have it on the record from the Sunday Times.
We're not the people who produced something which turns out to be based on dodgy evidence, like this report of yours.
Sorry, you've just heard.
You still stand by it, do you?
100%.
No, we didn't leak any. But that's neither here nor there.
Well, you say it's not here or there.
The question is the authenticity of this report, which, as you know, generated a real hornet's nest, and it turns out to be based upon evidence that was deeply unreliable. You know, if you were to say to me now,
this. You've had this report for 6 weeks.
Yes.
You've found paltry amounts of evidence. You've had this report.
How many
for
mosques
6 weeks.
did you actually find evidence in?
We visited a total of 100 mosques.
Yes, and in how many did you claim to find evidence of this literature being disseminated?
And in 26 we have.
26 you claim you found it, and in 6 of those we have found evidence that the receipts are unreliable.
And you've also found the evidence that they cannot deny the literature. Look at the gentleman there from the Tawheed Mosque denying the connection with the literature. When your receipt, which you yourself show on the programme, shows an intimate connection between Tawheed Mosque and the bookshop next door. Intimate connection. The books are all written by somebody called Sheikh Abdullah bin Baz, who is the founder of the mosque. The leading scholar of the mosque, Suhaib Hassan, is a pupil of bin Baz. Bin Baz is one of the main
This is neither here nor there. The question is the authenticity of your evidence.
The issue is community cohesion in this country. The issue is the literature that is freely available.
And your report has contributed, has it, to community cohesion in this country?
The people who have undermined community cohesion, I stand by it all. The people who undermine community cohesion are those who are producing books such as Women Who Deserve to Go to Hell, the ones who are producing anti-Semitic and homophobic literature. They are the ones who, as it were, should be questioned. And it's amazing to me that on an entirely tertiary issue, Newsnight could devote a 17-minute package, having ignored a report that has been looked at.
Authenticity is all, as you well know.
And it remains authentic. It remains 100% authentic, Jeremy. The big problem is with Newsnight, with Peter Barron's appalling stewardship of this programme.
Dean Dodson, thank you. Now, as measures of reassurance go, they don't come much bigger than the US Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, the Swiss National Bank, the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, all clubbing together. They promised to make very large amounts of money available for commercial banks to borrow. It's the latest and most dramatic attempt to stop the credit crisis triggered by the stupid mortgage lending of American banks from tipping economies into recession. Now, our economics editor, Stephanie Flanders, is here. What have they done, Stephanie?
Well, as you've said, in effect, the largest central banks in the world have got together to announce that they're all together going to issue a lot more cash to banks, offer a lot more cash to banks, so in an effort to try and get them to stop hoarding cash and worrying about their liquidity, and finally push down the rate that banks lend to each other and then in effect lend on to us. Now, you'll remember, Jeremy, when we first started talking about the credit crunch, the way we measured the severity of that crunch, and I kept on going on about it, was this interbank rate and the gap between that rate that the banks lend to each other at and the official bank rate, the rate that the Bank of England wants interest rates to be. Now, that gap went up to about 1 percentage point at various points in September, and that people felt worried by that because it had in effect tightened credit conditions by that much without the Bank of England doing anything. Now, we thought that problem was easing, but that gap has opened up again to pretty much the same level over the last few weeks, and the banks were very worried that was going to tip economies into recession, that even while their central banks were madly cutting rates.
To be clear about that, that is the rate at which banks lend to one another.
Lend to another,
and
then that will in effect...
Because they don't really trust each other.
Well, and because they're hoarding cash themselves, because they don't know what they're going to find in their balance sheets.
OK, how significant is this?
Well, it's significant for three reasons. One, which is probably the least significant, is the scale. We're talking about £50 billion all told, all the banks together, which is not a small amount. It's significant also, particularly in the Bank of England's case, because to some extent some of those concerns we heard about moral hazard, about not making the risk of making bad decisions by the banks, banks not pay for those bad decisions by being able to get off lightly with easy lending. Some of those, not all of those, but some of those concerns have been released. But the most important thing is the fact that it's coordinated. We just don't see, in effect, nearly all the G7 central banks act together on a single day very often. The last time it happened was after 9/11, and that was a much smaller amount.
You have literally got one word. Is it going to work?
It's going to work possibly on this issue, but not on the broader issue, because there's just too much else going on.
Stephanie, thank you. Now, coming up on the programme, Sir Jerry Robinson helped to turn around one hospital. He tells the chief executive of the NHS how he thinks the whole organisation can be fixed. But first, a roundup of today's news. Our main story tonight, a Newsnight investigation into a report into extremism in British mosques by the influential Policy Exchange think tank has uncovered evidence suggesting that some of the evidence backing up the research may have been fabricated. The Police Federation has accused the Home Secretary, Jackie Smith, of betraying officers and called for her immediate resignation. The decision came during a meeting of police officers to discuss a pay deal. The Federation said it's to ballot members to see if they want to press for the right to strike. Gordon Brown has announced changes to British policy in Afghanistan with a new emphasis on long-term development and security. He told MPs that it involved handing over more responsibility for maintaining order to Afghan forces. He ruled out talks with the Taliban but said insurgents who gave up violence should be given a role in the country's future. Britain's protested to Russia after Moscow demanded that the British Council close all but one of its offices in the country. Moscow's move is partly a response to Britain's expulsion of 4 Russian diplomats in the summer over the murder of Alexander Litvinenko. The markets initially rallied after news of the central bank's initiative broke. The FTSE 100 share index closed up. In New York, the Dow Jones was also up. Against the euro, the pound was up, and against the dollar, the pound was also up. If you've been glued to the television all evening, you'll know that a little earlier the businessman Sir Jerry Robinson resumed his attempt to discover what's wrong with the National Health Service. He returned to the hospital in Rotherham, which was the subject of his modestly titled programme, Can Jerry Robinson Fix the NHS? It is, after all, only the biggest employer in Europe with an annual budget of around £90 billion. Here's a resume of what he found second time around. When Sir Jerry Robinson first visited Rotherham, he was confronted with waiting lists, discontented staff and a financially uncertain future.
The surgeons throw tantrums and the anaesthetists throw tantrums regularly.
It can be quite difficult for management to achieve things because there is a power base made up of consultants in the organisation that has the capacity, the ability to block change.
Here we go.
On his first visit to Rotherham, Robinson was appalled by the level of waste in the hospital.
Now, here's an empty theatre here, and I've walked up the ward here. There's another one over here. It's empty, nobody in there.
1 year on, would anything have changed in theatre? On Friday afternoons, they were frequently left empty.
My God, you know, what a sea change. It's 20 to 4 on a Friday afternoon. That theatre's in use. That's in use. That's in use. That's in use.
Robinson had been concerned that many of the inefficiencies in the hospital resulted from animosity between managers and consultants, which led to confusion about who was in charge.
Most of the managers here, and I can't think of a single one, has an MBA. And, you know, without being derogatory to them, they've probably got 3 O-levels and they are managing people who've got 5 or 6 degrees each.
There's always a constant battle. It's like running a school for delinquents.
But it's 12 months later and Hospital Chief Executive Brian James has encouraged consultants to work more closely with the management.
Michelle Donlan had been a particularly outspoken consultant. But since my last visit, Brian had pulled a masterstroke and given her a management role.
As a manager who has no clinical experience to appreciate what actually happens at the coalface, the further away from patients you get, the more they become numbers. And when you're actually dealing with patients, people who are dealing with numbers can, you know, be seen to be perhaps not thinking the same way as you're thinking.
Less time spent arguing had led to increased output, which meant more money for the hospital. It had gone from starting last year with a £1.5 million deficit to finishing with a £600,000 surplus. Yet the hand of Whitehall was never far away.
Another review. Oh, God, they must be so sick of reviews in the NHS.
The NHS had so many changes thrust upon it, not all for the good. I think yet another review is not the answer. I mean, people need to take stock of all the changes that have been made and, for once, instead of paying lip service to it, listen to the frontline staff.
Now imagine we've just been to a medical ward.
Robinson was frustrated then and now by the government's delay in delivering a very expensive computer system, along with the inevitable inefficiencies for the hospital while it waited for it to be created.
And what you can actually see is that's all the admissions that have been received in the last 24 hours.
Right.
When they've all been assessed and they're ready to move, they'll transfer up to those wards.
But all of this is manually done?
It is.
All of it?
All of it's currently.
We originally promised the delivery of new patient administration system in 2005, for example, and that would have been okay at the time because we would have been needing to swap out and buy a new system anyway at that time. But that hasn't been delivered, and then we were promised 2.6, now it's 2.7, and the latest we hear it's probably going to be 2010 or 11 before we see the sorts of new technology we would need to run the hospital.
What's staggering is the sheer scale of the money wasted here. Just to get your mind around it, the money we're talking about here could have employed 60,000 nurses, 60,000 for 10 years. And somehow nobody has really questioned this. And I don't think anybody will, and nobody will be held to account for it.
For Robinson, it was now government holding Rotherham back. Last year, the hospital had introduced a system for old people to be referred to the hospital on the same day they saw their GP. But this now looks likely to be undermined by a trend to move services out of hospitals.
You know, I was shocked. Because this new government fad, and that's what it feels like to me, about treating more patients in the community, means that just 2 miles down the road, they're going to build a unit, they're going to call it something fancy like a polyclinic. And Brian, I think, is rightly concerned that it's just going to be in direct competition with the hospital. The hospital suspects the new centre will have a walk-in clinic, which treats minor emergencies, and that will be in direct competition with their A&E department.
I mean, if we got the same money for doing less work, then we wouldn't have a problem. You know, it would be fine. But if we lose the money that goes with it, in a way, we're losing easy patients, which allow us to fund a 24-hour service. We'd still be left with all the complicated, difficult cases.
I can see that.
To take away a whole group of minor injuries, and then there we are with all the expensive patients, and we're really struggling to pay for the department.
Do you know, the thing here is that government, they know nothing about management. What they have experience of is policies, and somehow They think that you introduce a policy and magically it will happen. But of course it doesn't happen, because unless something is managed, it doesn't happen. The policy therefore doesn't work because it isn't managed, and 2 years down the road there's another policy, and the whole process just goes through the same machinations over and over and again. And I promise you, 10 years from now we'll be looking at the same thing.
Well, Sir Jerry Robinson is here along with the Chief Executive of the NHS, David Nicholson. Is your anxiety that it's too centralised managerially or that it's too centralised politically?
No, it's politically. I don't have a problem with central management. I think if you want something to work well, you need to have a centre which sets the scene for the whole organisation. I don't have a problem with that. I have a huge problem with the fact that it's constantly changing from a political point of view. New ministers, new ideas. You know, one day it's matrons in, next day it's matrons out. There's another new policy for this. There's deep cleaning for that. There's, you know, frankly, I feel sorry for David, because you can run nothing. You can run nothing if every day the policies are changing. It's impossible.
Do you feel you can run things?
I don't think there's any need for Jerry to feel sorry for me, and I think he's absolutely right that in an organisation like the NHS you do need a central direction to make things happen. So I don't think you should feel worried about me at all. I think the issue about politicians is an interesting one, but it seems to me any organisation, public organisation like ours, which has almost £100 billion worth of public money, politicians have a legitimate interest in what happens. It's certainly, as far as, for example, setting priorities are concerned, it seems to me absolutely vital. But I agree with you. But what I agree with, Jerry, is that it is very important to give a firm and clear and consistent environment for people to work in. That's absolutely right.
He's right. I mean, this is public money. We all have to pay our taxes. Is it not right that people we elect to go into government have some control over what happens to them?
I don't have a problem with control. What I have a problem with is constant interference, a constant changing of the goalposts. That's what I have a problem with.
Do you feel constantly interfered with?
I don't think that's the issue for me. I mean, there is no doubt we've gone through a process in the NHS. No, we've gone through. I'm a manager. You know, I want to change the NHS, and it seems to me we've gone through a process where we've put a huge amount of money into the NHS. The country's put a huge amount of money into the NHS, and the way we've got change is by national targets, is by national top-down targets. We're now moving away from that. I think increasingly NHS managers need to look out to their population and their public locally rather than up to Whitehall.
No, I agree with that.
And it's one of the things I say to managers across the NHS. You know, if you've spent as much time trying to manage your business as you tried to manage the politics, we'd all be happy. So it's a two-way issue, I think.
You know, David, of course we put an awful lot of money into it, and we haven't got the value for it. We really haven't. You know, I don't argue for a minute that targets have had a beneficial impact. In fact, it's one of the few things in my experience that's had a beneficial impact. But we have moved from about 50 billion to nearly 100 billion into the health service. We've got some improvement for that, but we have got nothing like the improvement we should have got for that kind of money. The money was spent on huge increase in salaries with contracts that actually made less sense than they made before, that made people feel less incentivised than they were before. GP systems were paid huge sums of money that they were very delighted to get, but actually had to do less for it.
Those aren't political decisions, they're managerial incompetencies, perhaps, or managerial mistakes. Some of them were, you admit, were managerial mistakes.
I would love to know whether those decisions about salary settlements were made by David and his team, or they were made by the Department of Health.
Well,
I'd love to know that.
But, you know, we've been through a process of changing the pay arrangements for most of the staff in the NHS over the last few years, and it was needed. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind, if you look at general practice or even consultant medical staff, by any stretch of the imagination, their pay needs to be reformed and changed. And that's what we've been doing.
What about something like the IT system? I mean, the figures you produced on medical records, of course, did make the case overwhelming that you should have some sort of computerisation of them. But I mean, this is hardly a great advertisement for the way the NHS is run, is it?
Well, I mean, first of all, there's been enormous success as far as much of the IT system is concerned. One of the things that you showed on the programme, Jerry, was the PACS system, the digital X-ray system, which moves images all around the hospital.
Yeah, but
was part of the national.
This is part of the problem. I mean, this is part of the problem. Frankly, you could have probably bought that system for, you know, £20 million. I have no idea. It's not very difficult to get a decent X-ray system, and I bet they're all over the world. What's happened here is what's happened here is we've set up a system. We spent a huge sum of money on it. So far, it's delivered surprisingly little. It's delivered in the simple areas like the GP system, where frankly What we said to the GPs was pretty well, carry on with the systems you've got at the moment, make them compatible with a bigger system. There's no way, David, that you can argue that anything other than a shambles has happened with that computer system, and it's got in the way of even existing hospital systems not being able to be developed. It was a very, very poor, it's been a very poor exercise so far.
And I think this is part of the issue, I think, with Jerry, is that the NHS is not just about hospitals. You know, there's a huge amount of work that's done in the community primary care and community care, and the system, electronic prescribing, all these things have been put in. Now, I absolutely agree with you. We've had a problem with some of these big systems going into some of the hospitals. And the way we're dealing with it, I think you would probably agree with, what we're going to do is delegate much more responsibility to local hospitals to enable them to manage their own affairs. And that seems to me exactly the right thing to do, because that's the way we'll get the change. But we're learning from that, and we are moving forward.
I didn't look at the systems outside hospitals, and I know that they are simpler systems by definition, because hospital systems are very complex. The system inside the hospital so far has delivered very, very little, and it's cost a huge sum of money. Many private companies have gone bust in the exercise trying to make it happen. It was an appallingly managed exercise by any standards, and somehow, because it's so large, we kind of let it go by.
Well, I don't accept that. I mean, there's been a whole series of reports about the IT programme. Probably the national IT programme, the NHS, has been the most looked at IT programme you could possibly imagine. An enormous spend. I mean, in that hospital, you know, we're going to be the first country in the G8 to completely digitalise its X-ray system across the whole country. That's a fantastic thing.
I'd love to believe that. I'd love to believe it. I'd love to see it happen.
Absolutely.
I think we're going to be discussing this again, don't you?
I think so.
I think so. Thank you both very much indeed. Now, before the papers, a quick word about tomorrow's programme. Gordon Brown promised today that this government's going to do more on abusive drinking by young people. So before the Christmas spirits take hold, we present Booze Night, where we'll take a sobering look at the effects of alcohol on our society. The documentary maker Paul Watson will revisit some of the people who appeared in his film Rain in My Heart last year. Tomorrow...
Hide the alcohol from anyone, anywhere. You know, you'll make excuses, or just going to the toilet, off you go to the toilet, and you've got a bottle stashed in the bathroom somewhere.
And then nobody will know.
Then come out and make out that you've just been to the toilet.
Got to play the system, haven't you?
And that's Booze Night tomorrow. More details online. Tomorrow morning's front pages. The central bank interventions are on the front page of the FT and on the front page of The Guardian. The Daily Mail goes with news that the contraceptive pill is going to be available without a prescription in chemists. Banks offer billions to fend off recession is the front page in The Times, that central bank intervention. And according to The Sun, a whole series of Liverpool players have been burgled while they've been out playing matches. Well, that's all from Newsnight tonight. You can get it all again on our website. Gavin's here, as I mentioned, with Booze Night tomorrow night. From all of us here, though, for now, good night.
Good evening. It was cold and frosty to start the day today, and it's cold and frosty to end it. By dawn, you can see the extent of that frost across England and Wales, with a few patches of mist and fog. To go with the frost across northern England, plenty of sunshine to start the day, a lovely but cold start. Similar through the Midlands, but for East Anglia, grey conditions with some patches of fog, but away from that should be fine with some sunshine. However, along the southeastern coast there is a bit more in the way of cloud developing. That'll be pushing its way inland slowly during the day. Shouldn't really be affecting the far southwest of England. Some spells of sunshine here through the morning, not quite so cold at 4 or 5 degrees. But a touch of frost for central and eastern parts of Wales, a few patches of mist and fog. Away from that, should be fine with some sunshine. Northern Ireland and Scotland are breezy with a fair bit of cloud and just the odd spot of rain, but some brighter skies in the far northeast. Should stay dry and bright for northern England, much of Wales, sunny spells for the afternoon.